Yeah, it is great. We've got people starting to join, and we'll give it a few more
Okay.
minutes for us to accumulate.
Okay.
You're a hot ticket. I think a lot of people were excited and RSVPing, and really interested to hear from you. As am I. We've been doing a series now for a few months with some very impressive thought leaders, which I think you add a lot of credibility to that group, actually.
No, it's a great group. I've teed up, I've listened to one, and I've teed up the others because it's amazing. It's an amazing series. So thank you for doing this.
Oh, well, I mean, for me on a personal level, it's like a learning experience. So there's like a truly self-interested motivation there.
Right.
But for us as a company, it's a learning experience. So there's that. And then it's also a little bit of a chance to use what is more or less a business platform of talking to our community, where normally we're just sort of talking like, what should you do in workplaces and stuff like that. But we're, I think, using the opportunity to present a really important moral and ethical question and share some knowledge about that. So for everyone, I mean, so it's really, we have to thank you. I don't know why you're thanking us. I'm hoping to get a lot out of our conversation here.
No, of course, of course.
And we are recording, and we will share the recording later, as we have done with the prior ones, because I'm sure some of the folks who tune in will have a lot they want to pass along to their colleagues and things like that.
All right. Great.
Maybe we'll just do another couple minutes before we get rolling. So Trinidad, Miami, Bay Area. Any other touchdowns over the years?
No, I lived in Barbados for a couple of years, but.
Yeah. Bayesians, yeah. Our company actually has a fair number of folks from Caribbean backgrounds.
Yeah. We are everywhere.
Yeah, like, of course, like a very well-educated elite, you know. And some of our top management, I think one of my most senior colleagues, his family background is Barbados, I believe. And another one of them is actually from Trinidad. Yeah, Shagu Holder is his name.
I will look him up.
Yeah.
It's that small that I will probably have a connection or two in common.
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah, it's very possible. It's very possible. I remember him telling me some stories about like his family background, and I believe that his family has some like pretty high profile history working for the state.
Yeah. Holder?
Holder, yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And now he's turned into an ace real estate guy, one of our top people. So let's see, maybe we should get started as we've started to accumulate quite a bunch of our excited and interested audience here. Our topic today is, it's kind of a double click into this world of really complex and fast moving issues around diversity. We've been hosting a series at Notel around the huge social justice and racial justice issues of the day. I mean, we were all just like stunned and aggrieved from the moment that video started circulating of the police killing George Floyd, and like the big national and global conversation that started there. And a lot of that is just internal too. It's like, you can be horrified by what the government is doing or the police are doing or something, but then you got to look at yourself. I mean, if you believe systemic racism is a thing, and I do believe it is. I think it is, right? But like, what are the access points and what are the ways to try to start turning the dial backwards on that inside your company, inside your community, maybe even in your society? And so our topic today is about unpacking intersectionality and inclusivity. And I'm really excited to have you, Sonja Gittens Ottley from Asana. You're the head of DE&I or D&I, or every different version of the acronym salad there?
Every different version. Head of diversity and inclusion at Asana, but really thinking about how are we, and I'm responsible for how are we thinking about these strategies that ensure that we're building this really inclusive environment that all employees can thrive and do their best work in. And that includes thinking about representation, thinking about belonging, but also thinking about equity and equity issues. So all of those areas encompass the work that I do.
Well, and you've got like a pretty substantial track record and body of experience on this, right? I mean, Yahoo, Facebook, these are colossal companies. I don't know if they were colossal at the moment they had to be. I mean, Yahoo is a lot bigger than Asana probably at the time you joined it, right?
Yeah.
And Asana is like 1,000 people all around the world, a very important product platform. Recently went public. Congratulations.
Thank you.
But you've sort of been in this field at a bunch of huge global tech companies now for quite some time. And I wonder if you can track a little bit your course through them so we know who we're hearing from and what experience you're drawing on.
Sure. So I started at Yahoo in a really different role. I was part of our public policy team and really focused on how are we thinking about the impact of our business decisions or the impact of human rights on the business decisions that we were making as a company. So as part of our business and human rights program, at that time, Yahoo was the first company or the only company in tech to have a program like that. And doing that work and having discussions with people on the ground, human rights activists, users who are using the product in a really different way from how the products had been envisioned and the platforms and tools had been envisioned. And those conversations really kind of brought to light that in order to build the products or to build the products the way the users are using them, the back end, the builders, people inside companies need to reflect the front end, our users and our clients. And that really was my pivot from public policy work into diversity and inclusion. How are we having people inside companies who have these different perspectives, who have these different backgrounds, who can really influence and shape what we're building? But beyond that, feel comfortable voicing those opinions, having that sense of psychological safety where they can really express their point of view and express their perspectives. So I shifted to Facebook, and my shift to Asana was really along the lines of we need to be doing this as a company or as an organization at a really early stage. It has to be done, and organizations need to be thinking about this at the same time that they're thinking about where are we storing data? What are the policies that we're building for our people? What's the product that we're building for our people? It cannot be an add-on. It has to be integral into the work that you're doing. So that was my shift from larger companies into a company like Asana, where there was just really interest in doing this right from the start. So I've been at Asana for almost 5 years now, helping to shape that direction. And really, one of the great things about Asana is that we really think about culture, same way that we think about product. It's intentional, it's process driven, but it has an impact on the product that we're trying to build because we're thinking about the policies and the programs that will allow us to build and ultimately achieve our mission, right? So that's kind of my journey through this world.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, the first kind of point you lay out is, I think it has some merit to explore it a little bit because I guess it has the ring of truth to it, but maybe it takes some proving to skeptical audiences, right? So it's like, if you serve a hugely diverse community of users, which is certainly true for all the businesses that you've been part of, and it's true for Knotel. I mean, a lot of different people walk into our offices, you know, whether it's our direct customer has a big diverse staff or they have other people coming in, they have vendors and customers or whatever. So if you want to make a product for a lot of different kinds of people, it's actually an axiom that you just suggested that you actually need to be representative yourself of what that community is like outside. And that, I mean, maybe it takes a little bit of argument for that, right? Because like, you know, why can't I read a bunch of books? You know, I may never have lived in Trinidad myself, but I know there's some Indians there.
Right.
By extraction, you know, like I can like read some stuff, talk to some folks. Why don't I just figure it out? Can't I somehow make the intellectual leap? But your point is actually, you can't. Help me get there.
You probably could, but you're missing, or you may be missing out on an experience that someone might have had that can bring a different light to it. So you've actually taken one step further by doing the reading, by starting to do the work, right? Many organizations haven't even done that. So when we think about it in terms of, it becomes an abstract concept. So it's something that is abstract as opposed to lived and experienced. And again, the crucial point of all of that is you can still have those people within your organization, but if they aren't comfortable voicing their opinions, sharing their concerns, expressing their point of view, that is actually not going to help to change it, right? One of the things that we were talking about, for example, before we started, if we were thinking about gendered bathrooms, and if we have people that present one way, but maybe of a different sex, if they're not comfortable raising their hands and saying, actually, having single sex bathrooms does not make me feel included in this environment, then we're doing them a disservice. So creating a space where you have people who can have the experiences, but also feel comfortable, takes you just that step further. It allows you you're building a great product, but imagine the product that you can build if you have the real thing inside your company sharing that experience. So it's taking you one step further along that line of building something that's even greater.
Yes, right. Yeah. I mean, the language of lived experience, it's interesting because I think sometimes folks might dismiss that in a superficial way as just like, oh, you're just saying I can't really understand or empathize with this certain point of view. And you're somehow questioning my ability to relate. Right. But I've also seen some really good literature that goes, and I think that might be true, actually. I think there's like a limit to how much you can empathize. Like for me to somehow try to understand and empathize, okay, like maybe I've experienced some racism in the US, but like it's definitely different from African Americans, what they experience in the US, or Black Americans feel. It's different. It's just got to be different. Like, and you could try to tell me for hours, and you just won't add up the whole life that you know somebody has had, and that's definitely part of it. But there's also content too that's just missing, right? It's not just like I like empathy for where you came from. It's just like there's all these little bits and pieces and stories and little patterns and different language and ways of thinking about stuff, mental models and frameworks and shortcuts.
Right.
They're all there in the room when that person's in the room.
Exactly. And again, the empathy piece is a strong piece. It's a piece that needs to happen. But to your point, there's a content and a context that people are bringing that just shifts it just that further. So I think empathy is really important. I think you need to have it to be doing this work, but I think there's just so much more that we could be doing if we're encouraging and inviting people to come into this space or to share this space with us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's also a distinction between come into this space versus let's make sure that this space actually is you're part of this space as opposed to inviting you into this space, right? It's really
right.
that creating that place of you actually do belong here. We're not just bringing you in. You belong.
Right. Yeah, right. Sitting in the back of the room is not the same as actively participating, and simply telling someone, please actively participate, is not the same as having them feel at home and feel included and having equal footing.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so that's the goal, right? Okay, fine. And it'd be hard for anyone to disagree with that. I mean, sometimes even some really kind of, prickly, kind of tough people will be like, yeah, I mean, they're there, you're on the call. Like, come on, it's your chance. You should just speak up. What's wrong with you? But seeing underneath that is something that for me anyway, personally, I've only in the last year or maybe 2 years started to see some of the literature and some of the nuance around how high stakes it is when you're the outsider.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm the outsider. I'm the youngest person. I'm the only Indian person. Maybe I'm the only woman, or I'm one of two, or whatever. Yeah. The first time I open my mouth, that's scary in a way that it might not be for someone who's included. It's high stakes. If I was a little nervous and I made a little mistake, now I'm like zapped and I'm in the penalty box for a long time. Like there are a bunch of these experiential factors, right, that are invisible.
Yes. And part of that work is having people, goes back to the empathy piece. I may not have that experience, but I need to be able to recognize that somebody else might be having that experience and understand what it's like to be in their shoes. So recognizing that, am I actually creating a space? And this is where the conversation around allyship and advocacy, which has also bubbled up a lot in the last 6 months, comes up, right? I may be in the majority in the room, but I need to be aware that somebody else might not be in the majority. How am I intentionally creating a space for them to participate? How am I making them comfortable? How am I advocating for them in that space? How have I advocated for them to even be included in that space, right? So it's also about taking on that work and that role of being a champion for others. One of the things that I like to say is, again, we've been using this term of allyship with everything that's happened with the murder of George Floyd and subsequent events, that it's an action driven work and word. So really thinking about what do I do to really create that space. And when I think about it in terms of intersectionality, for example, and just to be clear, let me just ground it in how we think about intersectionality. We've always been thinking and talking about diversity and inclusion in terms of race, or in terms of gender, or in terms of socioeconomic differences, right? We know that diversity is really along visible and invisible things that shape us, and we all have them. But intersectionality means that, yeah, in this room, we might all be women, but my experience as a Black woman might be really different from that of a white woman, or that of an Indian woman, or that of a Hispanic woman. And then my experience as a Black immigrant woman is really different from that of an African American, a Black American woman, right? So how do we create a space for all of those different perspectives to acknowledge that those experiences are different, and really recognize that, yeah, we might be talking about women, but there are different things that are happening for each of us. So that's where
it kills me. I struggle so much on this one. We're going to double click on this. Of course, this is our like mission. I'm a person of color. So does that mean that you and me, hey, you understand? Come on, Sonja. And it's different. It's different.
Exactly.
So, but let's get to that. I want to spend a couple minutes, and I want to workshop with you and take the advantage of this time with you. Okay, so we know what inclusion would look like. You know, the person is comfortable, you got lots of different people, they're participating the right way, but that's because there's some things under there that you've de-risked for them.
Yeah.
You mentioned allyship as distinct from mentorship, as distinct from sponsorship, as there are some different roles you can play. And I also want to look at the word leadership, because the job of leader is really hard. Like, you know, one-on-one, you can think about, all right, how do I make a single person here feel included? They sit next to me at my desk at this giant company, and how do we, okay, that's cool. But there are some harder settings, right? The team meeting, the bigger format, you know, the hierarchy chains in an org. Talk to me a little bit. Let's like come up with a couple of good best practices here on thinking about and winning that inclusion goal, being, I guess, things that will help you be more aware of it, make it more aware in the room, and also some good best practices that will diffuse or de-risk some of the common pitfalls, right?
Sure.
So let's work on that a little bit.
So if we're thinking about leadership, and for leaders, it's really hard if I say you need to be thinking about diversity and inclusion as a leader. And for a leader, how I like to frame it is, what are your values as a leader, right? And I'm really clear that you don't need to have as those values anything, you don't need to have a phrase that says diversity and inclusion, right? To be an inclusive leader. But when I see in your values that you're thinking about, I want my team to be treated fairly, or I want my team to really consist of the best talent. That's where I'm talking about diversity and inclusion. So if I want my team to be treated fairly, fairness, creating an even playing field, I want the best talent, but you know what? The best talent does not always look the same way. So let's unpack that a little in terms of what are you doing to ensure that you're hiring the best talent that comes from all backgrounds, right? So when we start to use language like that, it's less about using the phrases diversity and inclusion, but more about dialing into the values you have as a leader, and ensuring or showing how they map back to inclusive practices.
Right. So like a valuable exercise for an individual leader who may be listening to you speaking here of like, all right, well, what are my values and how do they connect here? These are not competing aims, but we should see them working together. And at this point, there's so much research and literature about like getting the best result through diversity. You just got to see how it connects.
Exactly.
It's a way of recommitting. But then, so then what are some tactics? Like what's a tactic? Do you want to
So after you do
enforce meeting hygiene of a certain kind?
yeah.
Do you want to police interruptions? Do you want to feature people and give them a chance to really like present? Like, help me with some
I
of
would
these.
say yes to all those things, but I'd actually start one step back. So after you do those values, I think there's a part of it where as a leader, you have to kind of be courageous or vulnerable, and really say, you know what, I am committing to doing a couple of these things. I'm committing to really ensuring that everyone on my team feels as though they can speak up and share their perspectives, because you all are all here because you all are the best talent for this job. And for us to succeed, we need to have everyone's opinions as we build. So here's what I'm doing. If you see me, and I think part of it is modeling that behavior. These are my expectations as a leader. I expect you all to be ensuring that you're creating different ways in meetings for people to contribute. I don't expect everyone to want to speak up in a meeting. That might not be comfortable for everyone. But let's just normalize sending agendas beforehand and having people share opinions before the meeting, or share or give input before the meeting. Simple tool like that allows not just the introverts to feel comfortable expressing their opinions, but if I'm the only person in the room and it's just uncomfortable for me to raise my hand, I now have a window to do that, right? So normalizing behaviors like that. Another thing that I encourage leaders to do is really think about who are you assigning projects to, and how are you building relationships with your team. One of the things that I found is after the murder of George Floyd, people wanted to reach out to the Black community in their organizations. That can feel quite awkward if you don't have a relationship with your Black team members. So building relationships does not mean that you become best buddies. It's really knowing what's going on in someone's life and the things that matter to them, right? Because another crisis will happen. It might impact the Black community. It might impact the Hispanic community. It might impact the LGBT community. So having those relationships already allows you to kind of check in and say, okay, this has happened. How are you? It just kind of normalizes that in a really authentic way, as opposed to this feels awkward for me. It feels awkward for you. It's just a whole lot of awkwardness happening.
It's like the mirror image.
Difficult.
It's a mirror image of this point around diverse representation. So you may have created a company that has lots of kind of people, but if you're just isolated off with your little club, you know, the whatever, the boys club or whatever, then you're not getting the benefit of that power, right?
Exactly. And even you can see it happen, for example, when mothers return to work after parental leave, for example, where a manager in a really well-meaning way might think, you know what, they just returned from maternity leave, parental leave. They don't want to travel when we would travel. They don't want to travel for work. I'm not going to give it to them. I'm going to assign somebody else. But have you had that conversation with that parent? Normalizing those behaviors, and normalizing asking questions, building those relationships in a way that really helps you to get the best out of your people, really allows you to assign projects, really creating tactics that allow everyone essentially to thrive, but also being courageous enough to say, you know what, I didn't get it right this time. I'm going to do better. I'm going to try harder, or I'm going to learn from this, because you've created a space where people can also say, this didn't work, or this doesn't feel right. I think that's
like
really
the vulnerability of leading on diversity. I mean, it's an area where vulnerability matters so much because we've screwed up so much. We will screw up more. And to pretend like you have some straightforward kind of like, our marketing strategy is right, our diversity strategy is right. Like they're not the same. They're not the same. Okay. So let's get to an even trickier topic. And you know, one of the really interesting things about diversity and inclusion, which these days sometimes people include equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion, or maybe in a little while these jobs will be called, you know, head of anti-racism or something. It's really interesting that the topic keeps moving, the language and the vernacular keeps moving. And I don't think, I mean, there have been times that I thought, oh, it's just sort of like a trendy, what's the latest term? you know, you used to say African American, then you say Black, and then you say BIPOC, and then you say this, and why are they, does it really matter? Actually, I think it's evidence of the intellectual work that is happening in certain quarters where people are really thinking about some complicated issues, and then we see it trickle out, and then by the time I read about it in whatever, you know, article I'm reading or some colleague is mentioning to me, I'm thinking like, wow, where did that come from? And that is how I felt about intersectionality, right? Like 12 months, 18 months ago, some of my colleagues are like, intersectionality really matters. We need to make a commitment to it. And to me, it's coming from left field. I'm like, wait, isn't that just diversity? Like, what are we talking about? So help us get up to speed.
Sure. I think so. We've been talking about it. The label the label existed, but the label was not, as you said, it was not widespread, right? But we certainly had been doing the research. So, for example, we knew that although we celebrate Equal Pay Day on April 4th, that actually only meant that it was the day that, because people had done research, that was the day that the pay of white women was equivalent to that of men. And that the equal pay day for Black women was much later, and that the equal pay day for Hispanic or Latinx women was even further, right? Because of the research. So the concept had existed, but we hadn't put a stake in the ground in terms of really declaring it outside of really academic circles and people doing this work. But I think that that's part of what you see in terms of any trend that goes. People have been doing this work for ages, but it takes time for that work to really get accepted as work that is really critical to moving the needle. So, and I say that really to give context to, this is not new. The concept of intersectionality is not a new one, but certainly the normalization of it is a lot newer. So for anyone doing this sort of work in an organization, they've been thinking about this, I'm sure. I have, and really recognizing that everyone's experiences are slightly different. So for example, one of the things that we do at Asana, like any organization, is we do engagement surveys, right? We really get a sense of how are our employees feeling? How are they engaged? And I look at it across the context of belonging and voice, but there are a lot of different areas that we look at. And I look at, just as an example, I look at the Asian experience. But within that Asian experience, I also look at different categories. The Asian experience as a whole, but what is the Southeast Asian experience versus the South Asian experience versus the East Asian experience? And those are three different experiences, right?
Yeah, it's only 2 billion people that
exactly.
Yeah.
So using a broad brush of Asian does not give really the real sense of what is happening for all of these different groups. And also looking at it, adding on another layer of woman or gender, or adding on another layer of race, age. So really, there's so many different nuances that happen, and really being aware of how does that impact people? Because at the end of the day, we're looking at data, but what are the things that we can do to really shift the needle for people? And one of the other things that I'd say is that it's really easy to get into trying to solve everything, because there's a lot of things that can be solved, but really thinking about what can have the highest impact. What are the things that you need to do that actually solving for this subgroup actually has impact and affects a much broader category. So really being able to prioritize based on those things helps companies and leaders to really think about what matters. But just going back to intersectionality, so it continues to be so important. And I know I've been talking about it in terms of race and gender predominantly, but we have to be thinking about age. We have to be thinking about disability. All of those things add different layers and really change experiences. But if you're thinking about experiences in terms of the people that are in the company, as well as experiences of your users, if you're thinking about who are you making any product or service for.
Well, I mean, so, you know, that part feels clear. Like there's a Rubik's Cube of different experiences. And as you like keep thinking of each person one by one, you'll find like a zillion different things.
Right.
But that's actually the puzzle, right? Like the puzzle is, okay, now we found ourselves in a spot where everyone's different. I guess we knew that. Maybe we didn't act that way. All right, fine. Let's act like everyone's different. Well, what can you do? Is there anything you can do now? Aren't you just paralyzed by like the massive prism of all the different ways people behave and act and their experiences? Like, can you say anything? Is it safe? Like, what could you possibly promote as a policy? Like, you know, is Monday Columbus Day or Indigenous Peoples Day? Or is it only one? Or is it both? Or is it neither? Because that's too US centric. I mean, you start having this fractalized world, and isn't the goal to create some kind of community that we are all in something together?
Yeah. That is the puzzle that we're all trying to solve, right? So let's use your Monday example. So in the US, for decades, we marked or observed Monday as Columbus Day, right? Christopher Columbus came to these shores. But we've had a movement where we're recognizing that, well, Christopher Columbus, maybe there was more to that story. And really, what was the impact that he had on Indigenous people? So it shifted to Indigenous Peoples Day. A number of states in the United States celebrate or observe Indigenous Peoples Day. So that's, I think, is a great conversation to have. By doing that, are we dismissing Christopher Columbus? No. But we're saying that there's more to that story.
Look, I mean, I think you could probably get into a big argument about colonialism and the consequences of Columbus.
Exactly.
But like, here's an interesting nuance on it.
Yeah.
In New York, where I am and where I'm from, it's never expressed as, oh no, the guy was awesome and he is the reason America is here. That's not the lead argument. The lead argument is so interesting. Italian Americans, immigrants to this country, are just really proud of this like Italian dude.
Right.
And it's kind of like hard to be mad at them. It's like, okay, I guess, like very famous, maybe the most famous Italian person in the history of the world. Like maybe. They're not saying that, like, I don't know. It's yes. So
but
it's
that's
like,
exactly the conversation, because how do you acknowledge your Italian American community and create that space for them, right? And I think part of it, and you can see that possibly happen with Thanksgiving, right?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Right? So it's, how are you creating a space where you can have those conversations and create a space where you can have those conversations where people don't feel defensive? Where is this an opportunity to learn more about Christopher Columbus? Is this an opportunity to learn more about what happened to Indigenous people? How are we creating a space to also say, so how I thought about it for this year at Asana was, let's learn about why people want to observe Indigenous Peoples Day. Here's a few data points about why this is observed, so that it becomes less about defensiveness and more about education and empathy and understanding.
Yeah, you've been using the language a lot about like creating a space, the boundaries around a community, the invitation and permission to sort of be there. And that's very interesting because it's a different position. It's a position of leadership. And I guess, as a company, you're kind of in charge of something. And so it's a position of leadership, but it is different from trying to like debate the issue. That's not what it's about, right? And some of these things, I guess, it's part of where you guys come from. And I guess I don't have to take a position on whether I think it's a good idea that you do this or you do that. But, people from India celebrate this holiday, or people from the Caribbean have, carnival or something. And that's cool. I mean, I guess that's who you are. It's where you're from. Right. Fine.
Yeah.
Let's learn why.
Let's learn why. And I come from a multicultural island, right? So for me, we celebrate Diwali, we celebrate Eid al-Fitr, we celebrate a number of different, we celebrate Christmas, and we have actual public holidays for all of these things, right? Where there's a lot of food and a lot of celebrating. We have days in our house, right? It's very, and part of that is really because it's also recognizing that this is the community that we live in, and we're recognizing everyone is bringing something different from the table. And I recognize that that is a very unique experience, and not everyone has had that opportunity. So I really enjoy the idea of creating a space for people to learn, to people to understand why it's important.
So understanding the variation,
Yeah.
being upfront and really being sensitive. That was one important point. The second one is where there are points of difference and where people are coming from and things they're doing, learning and understanding where people are coming from as a form of creating some empathy and underlining the shared space that you've got together. Cool.
Yeah.
So that's a second point.
Yes.
There was a third point that you slid in there a few minutes back that I want to inspect with you a little more is finding the broad common themes, because those can become programs that help everyone feel included. So you find something among the transgender community, you find something among the second generation immigrants whose parents were a certain caste when they were in India, for example, is something that's a little bit in the news. And you find something and you're like, huh, okay, well, you know what? In our commitment to diversity on this, we're going to have to like raise this and make sure that, because there may be some things you hadn't noticed that are elsewhere, that by making this broad point, you're including more folks. Is that the idea?
Yeah, that's the idea. And so one of the things that we do to kind of get to that point of kind of understanding more about that, we do a real talk series at Asana where we have people within Asana talk about their experiences. They are not speaking for their entire community. They're speaking and sharing their experience. So for example, we've done a real talk series on being Muslim in America after 2016, or being biracial, or being an immigrant, or being Black, and really just sharing their experience. And the idea behind it is, let's understand more about our coworkers and our teammates, but really, and know where they're coming from, but let's see what are the common themes. What are the things that we're hearing that says, oh, or triggers the, I've had that experience, or I didn't know about that experience. I want to learn more about it. And this is the space that my colleague has to navigate on a daily basis. This kind of creates that sort of understanding. And I think it's really important to kind of, by doing that, it starts to normalize the, oh, so this is why we're doing this sort of program. This is why we're even doing diversity and inclusion, and why Sonja even exists in the organization, because we're creating those opportunities, which then allows us to understand, okay, I now understand why we can have a conversation about anti-racism, because I've heard about those experiences. And now I understand why we're going to be doing these initiatives, right? So creating those spaces, again, having those conversations really gets you to building a foundation where everyone understands why this is important, why this matters, but also why this matters, not just in an abstract way, but in a, by doing this, I am really creating or setting up everyone to succeed.
Sonja, so you're at a really, you're at a classic Silicon Valley, super nerdy, data-driven company. Do you take measurements around D&I? Not measurements like how many Black people work in the company, but measurements around inclusion, like do I feel included and how that's differential across groups? Like, what are the metrics that matter? What are the couple ones that you really care about?
Yeah. So we do look at qualitative and quantitative data. I think if you're just doing this without looking at data, you're missing everything. So that's the first thing I'd say. You have to be looking at data, because you have to be thinking about this in the same way that you would any business strategy, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, in terms of data, the representation data, it's important. You want to know what you're going to, because you're using those numbers to essentially determine, oh, this is the percentage of Black people we have in the company. Where do we need to get to, right? So I'm not discounting getting that data, but there's a lot of data that's also important. So as I mentioned, we do engagement surveys. We ask questions like, do I feel as though I belong? I feel as though I belong at Asana. I feel as though I can speak up. My manager listens to my point of view. Getting to that belonging and voice. Psychological safety. I feel
you ask these things by race, gender, age, all that stuff?
We ask these questions to everyone, and then we can look at the data by race, by gender, by age, etc.
And you do it globally? I mean, in Europe, for example, we don't ask race from our staff.
So that's right. So we ask those questions globally, but outside of the US, we don't look at race. Right now, again, because of privacy restrictions and so on, we do look at it in terms of gender. So we ask those questions, but there are also different questions that we look at that also impact or give you some sense of how you're tracking in terms of inclusion. When you look at management questions, for example, how my manager treats me, my manager treats me with respect, those sorts of questions. So we look at that data as a pulse in terms of how do our people feel. We also do focus groups with our employees where we ask some of those questions, but a focus group is really different because you have to have created that space where people feel comfortable saying these things to you face to face, right? But then we also look at other data. What is our attrition numbers? What does pay equity look like in the organization? So really thinking about all of those things really gives you a much clearer picture of how you're tracking and the work that you need to be doing. So looking, for example, at the engagement survey and those belonging and voice questions, that helps you determine what are the programs, what are the pain points that you're seeing? What do you need to dig into? What's a program that you need to build to solve for this?
So Sonja, this has been like such a practical, I mean, not just the theory, but also like so many nuts and bolts things I'm excited about implementing in our company. I mean, there's some really good ideas that you just laid out that I suspect many will appreciate. We've just got another like minute or two. And so maybe we can have one last question, which is, what's a new thing, a new program, a new sort of initiative that you've been either developing or you put into action this last 6 months or something that you're pretty excited about, that you think is like a pretty high impact thing? Because, you know, there's the good hygiene stuff, but then sometimes you must have brilliant ideas and you're like, we got to do this. This is something important.
Allyship for senior leaders. Thinking about, particularly this year, really being clear on what is my role as a senior leader in the organization for our leadership? How do you need to be showing up for your talent that has typically been marginalized? For some organizations, it might be women. For some organizations, it might be race. What does allyship mean for you as a senior leader in the organization? And really crafting for them, here are explicit tactics that you need to be implementing to move that forward. How are you building relationships? How are you thinking about projects? Really being clear and specific on these are the actions that you need to be taking. I think that doing that work is what moves the needle, because leaders can help to model the behavior and the expectations, and really focusing on them. And this does mean that the other work is not just as important, but focusing on leadership specifically, and giving them a call to action on this, I think is one of the things, I know is one of the things that will make a huge difference.
Amazing. Okay, well, I'll be looking forward to your article on, I don't know, Forbes, LinkedIn Learning, HBR, somewhere in there where I can steal a few more of your brilliant ideas. Sonja, it's been amazing having you on. Thank you so much for sharing so much of your wisdom with us. Hopefully it'll help all of us move the needle in the work that we're doing, because clearly you're leading the way.
Thank you so much, Amol. This has been so great to have this conversation with you. Thank you for doing this. All right, talk to you soon.
Bye-bye, everyone. We're going to record and publish.